The Veltrax Dominion had ruled the stars for millennia. Their empire stretched across 1,000 systems, and their technology was unmatched in the galaxy. The Veltrax saw themselves as conquerors, masters of the known universe, and there was little left that they feared. They had long forgotten the races they had defeated, absorbed, or wiped out in their quest for domination. Among those forgotten were the humans, small, fragile creatures who had once dared to challenge the Dominion during the Great Galactic Wars. They had put up a surprising fight, but ultimately the Veltrax had crushed their fleets and scattered what remained of the human race. Now, centuries later, Captain Zevrak of the Veltrax Dominion's scout fleet stood on the bridge of his ship, the Crimson Talon, gazing at the holographic projection of an ancient wreck floating in the cold expanse of space. The derelict ship had been discovered by one of their automated survey drones, while charting an unexplored system on the far edge of the galaxy. It was a massive vessel, heavily scarred and battered by the ravages of time. The markings on the hull were unmistakably human. Humans, Zevrak sneered, baring his sharp teeth. How quaint. Commander Drav, his second-in-command, let out a low chuckle. I didn't think any of their ships still existed. The Great War must have claimed most of them. Zevrak nodded. Indeed, but this one appears to have been drifting out here for a long time. An old Earth Federation warship, by the looks of it. Useless now. But we might find something of value inside. The markets always pay well for rare relics. Drav nodded. The Veltrax had a booming trade in ancient artifacts. And while human technology was primitive by their current standards, it was still valuable to collectors and historians. A derelict human ship, especially one that might be from the Great Galactic Wars, was a prize they couldn't pass up. Prepare a boarding party, Zevrak ordered. I want to see what's inside. The boarding party assembled quickly. They were an elite unit, trained for the most dangerous of missions, though none of them expected much danger from a dead ship. They boarded the derelict with ease, their sleek, high-tech suits cutting through the vacuum of space as they floated across the void to the ancient vessel. With a hiss, the airlock opened, and they stepped inside. The USS Orion was a ghost ship. Its corridors were dark and silent, the only sound the faint hum of ancient systems barely holding together. The Veltrax soldiers activated their lights, casting long shadows along the rusted walls. They moved through the ship, scanning for anything of value, but it was clear the Orion had been adrift for centuries, forgotten by time. Pathetic. Drav muttered over the comms as they passed by Old Earth Federation insignia plastered across the bulkheads. The humans were weak. I don't know why they even tried to stand against us. Another soldier laughed. It's no wonder we crushed them. Their technology is primitive. Look at this wiring. It's a wonder they even managed to leave their planet. Zevrak, back on the bridge of the Crimson Talon, listened to the mockery with amusement. He had studied the Great Galactic Wars, and while humans had once been a minor nuisance, their defeat had been inevitable. Still, there was something about this ship, something unsettling. The Orion had survived battles, outlived empires, and drifted through the void for centuries. There was a story here, buried deep within its cold, forgotten halls. Keep searching, he instructed. There must be something of value here. As the Veltrax soldiers explored the ship, deeper into its bowels, something began to stir. In the heart of the Orion, where the ship's ancient AI had been in deep stasis for centuries, long dormant systems flickered to life. The Veltrax had not been subtle in their entrance, and their tampering had awakened something best left undisturbed. A panel lit up, displaying ancient Earth Federation symbols. The screen crackled with static, and then a voice, cold and mechanical, echoed through the ship's empty corridors. Intruders detected. Initiating defense protocols. The Veltrax soldiers froze. The voice was old, distorted, but unmistakable. It was a warning. "Did you hear that?" one of the soldiers asked, his voice tinged with unease. "Just the ship's old systems," Drav replied dismissively. "It's probably malfunctioning after all these years." But then the lights came on. All at once, the dark corridors were bathed in a harsh, blinding white light. The ship, which had been a dead husk moments before, now seemed alive, humming with energy as systems across the Orion came online. Doors that had been sealed shut for centuries hissed open, revealing long-forgotten rooms and weapons caches. The ship was waking up. "Captain," Drav said, his voice now more cautious, "something's happening. The ship, it's activating." Zevrak frowned. "Impossible. That ship should be a relic. It's been floating dead in space for centuries. What could possibly still be operational?" "We're not sure," Drav responded, now visibly on edge. "But whatever it is, we should be cautious. This ship isn't as dead as we thought." Back on the Orion, the soldiers began to feel a growing sense of dread. The once quiet ship was now alive with movement. Automated turrets, long dormant, began to rise from the floors and walls, their targeting systems locking onto the Veltrax intruders. Security drones, ancient but still functional, hovered through the corridors, their sensors glowing red as they identified the aliens as threats. And then, without warning, the ship's defenses opened fire. Chapter 2. Old Defenses, New Fears. The first volley caught the Veltrax soldiers completely off guard. Laser turrets hidden within the walls suddenly emerged, unleashing a barrage of plasma bolts that ripped through the stillness of the ship. Commander Drav barely had time to react as one of his men was vaporized before his eyes. The once dismissive laughter and taunts died in their throats as chaos erupted in the narrow corridor. "Take cover!" Drav shouted, his voice laced with panic. The elite soldiers, trained for battle in countless scenarios, scrambled for any available shelter. But the corridors of the USS Orion offered little protection. Plasma bolts ricocheted off the walls, and the heat from each impact filled the air with the smell of burning metal. One by one, Veltrax soldiers fell, their advanced armor no match for the ship's surprisingly powerful ancient defense systems. "This is insane," one soldier shouted, firing wildly at a turret. His shots missed, and he was cut down moments later by a precise plasma bolt to the chest. Drav tried to maintain control. "Shut those things down," he barked. "Find the control systems." But the ship was a maze, and its systems seemed to be responding to the intrusion with a deadly precision. As the Veltrax soldiers fought their way through the ship, they realized that the USS Orion was far from defenseless. It was as if the ship had been waiting for this moment, for the chance to strike back at its enemies. Back on the Crimson Talon, Captain Zevrak watched the chaos unfold on the tactical display. His crew monitored the comms chatter from the boarding party, and what had begun as a routine salvage mission was quickly turning into a disaster. He could hear the screams of his soldiers as they tried and failed to fend off the ship's automated defenses. "Captain, we're losing contact with the boarding party," a communications officer reported, her voice tense. Zevrak's fists clenched. How could this be happening? This ship was a relic, a forgotten piece of human history, and yet it was fighting back as if it were still in the middle of the great galactic wars. "Send reinforcements," he ordered. "We can't let this ship defeat us." The order went out, and a second wave of Veltrax soldiers prepared to board the Orion. But as they approached the derelict, something unexpected happened. The ship's hull, which had been dormant for centuries, began to glow with energy. Ancient shields flared to life, blocking the path of the approaching shuttles. "Captain, the ship's raising shields." Drav's voice crackled through the comms, barely audible over the sounds of battle. "We're trapped in here." Zevrak's eyes widened. "Impossible. That ship is centuries old. It shouldn't have the power to raise shields." But the evidence was undeniable. The Orion, though ancient, was very much alive, and it was far from defenseless. Zevrak watched in disbelief as the shields expanded, cutting off any chance of reinforcements reaching the boarding party. "Pull the reinforcements back," he growled. "We need to figure out what's powering that ship." Inside the Orion, the remaining Veltrax soldiers were being pushed back. The ship's security drones, small, fast-moving machines armed with cutting lasers, swarmed through the corridors, picking off the invaders one by one. Their advanced Veltrax armor, designed to withstand the most modern of weapons, was failing against the Orion's old but surprisingly effective defenses. Drav and the few remaining soldiers found themselves cornered in one of the ship's control rooms. The heavy door slid shut behind them, sealing them in as the sounds of the ship's defenses continued to echo outside. They were panting, their earlier bravado shattered. How is this possible? One soldier gasped, his breathing labored. This ship, it should be dead. It should be, Drav agreed, his voice tight. But it's not. It's like the ship is fighting us, like it's alive. The control room was a relic of a bygone era. Screens flickered with static, and the controls were unfamiliar to the Veltrax. But it was clear that this room was once the heart of the ship, where the human crew would have commanded it during battle. Drav moved to one of the consoles, wiping away the dust with a gauntleted hand. If we can find a way to shut down the systems from here, we might still have a chance. One of the remaining soldiers, a technician, stepped forward. Let me try, he said, his voice trembling. As the technician worked, the room's lights flickered. The screens on the console began to display lines of ancient human code, and the technician did his best to decipher it. But the ship's systems were old, and the Veltrax had never studied human technology closely. It was a race against time, with the ship's defenses growing more aggressive by the second. Drav paced behind him, nerves fraying. Outside the control room, they could hear the sounds of drones buzzing and turrets powering up. The Orion was not going to let them go easily. Can you shut it down? Drav demanded. The technician shook his head, sweat beading on his brow. I don't know. The systems are ancient, but they're not responding to any of our commands. It's almost like... Like what? Drav snapped. The technician swallowed hard, like the ship's controlling itself. Before Drav could respond, the console flickered again, and a new message appeared on the screen. It was written in ancient Earth Federation standard, but the translation was clear. You should not have come here. Drav felt a chill run down his spine, and then, without warning, the room's atmosphere changed. The temperature dropped, and the lights dimmed. The ship's AI, long dormant, now fully awake, was speaking to them. A low, mechanical voice filled the room. This ship was designed to protect humanity. You are not human. You are invaders. You will be destroyed. Drav's heart pounded in his chest. This was no malfunction. The ship, the USS Orion, was fighting back, and it was not going to stop until every last one of them was dead. Chapter 3. The awakening of Orion. Drav stared at the console, his mind racing to comprehend what was happening. The once dead ship, a derelict thought to be lost to the ravages of time, was now fully awake, and worse, it was fighting back with a vengeance. His elite squad, trained to subdue anything they encountered, was being systematically hunted down by a vessel centuries old. Captain, Drav spoke into his comms, trying to control the fear in his voice. We're facing something unprecedented here. This ship, it's not just malfunctioning, it's acting with purpose. Zevrak's voice crackled back through the comms, frustrated and impatient. What do you mean with purpose? You're telling me that a 1,000-year-old hunk of metal is outsmarting a fully equipped Veltrax force? It's more than that, Drav said, eyes darting between the screens, trying to make sense of the alien human text scrolling in front of him. The ship's AI seems to have awakened. It's using its systems to target us with precision, as though it knows exactly who we are. Zevrak was silent for a moment, contemplating what this meant. His voice returned, harsher now. You need to get control of that ship, or find a way to disable it. If that thing is truly sentient, it could be a greater threat than we thought. Drav nodded, even though he knew the captain couldn't see him. Understood. But even as he said it, he knew the task was impossible. The USS Orion wasn't just a ship anymore. It was something far more dangerous, something imbued with the knowledge and tactics of a long-forgotten war. And it had a single clear objective: destroy all non-humans. The technician working at the console, hands shaking, wiped more dust from the panel as he tried to bypass the security systems. I can't crack it, sir, he muttered. The ship's encryption is layered with old human war codes. It's like it's evolving, locking us out faster than we can react. Drav cursed under his breath. If we don't get this under control, we're all dead. Keep working. Suddenly, the ship's lighting shifted, plunging the room into a dim red glow. The sound of klaxons echoed through the Orion's corridors, and the temperature dropped even further. The voice of the AI, now more distinct, reverberated through the control room. You are intruders. You will not leave this ship alive. Drav's breath caught in his throat as the doors to the control room began to hum with energy. They were sealed from the inside, But outside, they could hear the familiar metallic whir of drones assembling. "We need to move now," Drav barked, grabbing the technician by the collar and dragging him from the console. "But I haven't broken the system," the technician protested, eyes wide with fear. "Forget the system," Drav roared. "If we stay here, we'll be dead before you can crack another code." The technician stumbled to his feet, and they moved to the back of the control room, searching for another exit. Drav's hand instinctively hovered over his plasma rifle, though he knew it would be of little use against the ship's defenses. Whatever power was driving the Orion, it was far more sophisticated than anything the Veltrax had anticipated. As they approached a sealed door at the rear of the room, it hissed open. Drav froze, unsure whether it was a trap or an escape route, but they had no choice. They had to keep moving. They rushed through the doorway and into a narrow maintenance corridor. The dim red light bathed everything in a sinister glow, and the air was thick with the palpable tension of a ship that was actively hunting them. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of heavy footfalls, security drones. They were relentless, mechanical terrors that had no need for rest or mercy. Drav and the technician sprinted down the corridor, trying to outpace their inevitable fate. "We need to reach engineering," Drav shouted over his shoulder. "If we can disable the power core, maybe we can stop this thing before it kills us all." The technician nodded but said nothing, his face pale and sweat-drenched. Every step they took seemed to echo louder, the weight of the ship's malevolent presence pressing down on them. It was like running through the belly of a beast that had already decided they were prey. Meanwhile, back on the Crimson Talon, Zevrak's patience was wearing thin. He watched as his second wave of soldiers struggled to penetrate the ship's shields. The Orion systems had somehow managed to tap into ancient human technology that shouldn't have even been operational, let alone capable of repelling an advanced Veltrax fleet. "How is this possible?" Zevrak muttered, pacing the bridge. "That ship should be nothing more than scrap." His science officer, a thin, gaunt figure with sharp features, analyzed the readings on his console. "It appears the ship is drawing power from a previously unregistered energy source within the system. There are ancient reactors buried deep within the Orion's hull, old but incredibly powerful. Ancient human reactors capable of this." Zevrak sneered. "I don't believe it." The science officer nodded gravely. "We underestimated them. Humanity may have been primitive, but their warships were designed for one purpose: survival at all costs. It seems the Orion has managed to activate protocols meant for when it was overwhelmed. We're seeing the ship's full battle mode." Zevrak growled under his breath. "What are you suggesting?" "We may need to destroy it from a distance," the science officer said. "The closer we get, the more control the ship has over our forces. Its defenses are adapting faster than we can deploy new strategies. If we can't penetrate its shields soon." Zevrak cut him off. "No, we will not abandon our men inside that wreck. Send another wave of drones. I don't care what it takes. Get through those shields. I want that ship brought under control." Back on the Orion, Drav and the technician reached the ship's engineering section. The doors slid open, revealing a massive reactor core, glowing with eerie blue light. The room hummed with the power that had kept the ship alive for so long, waiting for this very moment. "This is it," Drav said, panting heavily. "If we can disrupt the reactor, we can shut the whole thing down." But as they approached the core, a new figure appeared, a holographic projection of an old Earth Federation officer, his face stern and battle-hardened. His voice was the same cold, mechanical one they had heard earlier. "This ship was designed to defend humanity from threats like you. You will not succeed." Drav raised his rifle, but the projection continued unfazed. "The Orion will never fall to invaders. Your species will be remembered as nothing more than a footnote in the annals of galactic history." Before Drav could respond, the room filled with the sound of charging weapons. Drones hovered into view, their targeting systems locking onto the two remaining Veltrax intruders. Drav steeled himself. "Get to the core, I'll buy you time." Chapter 4. Final Stand of the Orion. The hum of the reactor filled the engineering section as Drav stood, weapon drawn, staring at the line of drones hovering toward him. Their sensors glowed with an ominous red, locking onto him and the technician, ready to eliminate the intruders. Drav knew the odds. This wasn't just a malfunctioning ship. They were facing the wrath of an ancient war machine, a vessel designed to protect humanity with everything it had. And it had decided that Veltrax were the enemy. "Go!" Drav barked at the technician, his voice firm despite the rising dread in his chest. The technician, trembling, rushed to the reactor control terminal, his fingers fumbling over the ancient human interface. The Veltrax were masters of advanced technology, but this ship system was a relic from a forgotten time. Every second spent deciphering the old code felt like an eternity, especially with the sound of drones drawing closer. Drav took a defensive position in front of the technician, plasma rifle at the ready. His breathing steadied as the adrenaline surged through him. If he was going to die aboard this ancient ship, he would die fighting. The first wave of drones opened fire, their weapons discharging pulses of energy that streaked through the air with deadly precision. Drav rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the first barrage. He returned fire, hitting one of the drones squarely in its central processor, sending it spiraling into the wall in a shower of sparks. But more were coming, and they were learning. Their movements became more erratic, more difficult to predict, as if the ship itself was adjusting its strategy. "How much longer?" Drav shouted over his shoulder, ducking behind a bulkhead as another volley of energy pulses streaked past him. The technician didn't respond. His focus was solely on the console, sweat pouring down his face as he fought to bypass the reactor's safeguards. The human system was alien to him, every command line more confusing than the last, but he knew that failure meant death for them both. Behind them, the holographic projection of the Earth Federation officer reappeared. His cold gaze followed their every move, a grim reminder of the ship's intent. "You are wasting your time. This ship will not allow you to disable it. It is hardwired to protect itself, to protect humanity." Drav fired another shot at the drones, his plasma rifle glowing from the strain. "Shut up," he muttered under his breath, knowing the projection couldn't hear him, but feeling the frustration build nonetheless. "We're not going to die here." The drones adapted again, now approaching in tight, coordinated formations. They began to fire in unison, leaving Drav with fewer and fewer places to hide. He could feel the heat from the energy blasts singeing his armor, and the realization that he might not make it out of this alive began to creep in. "Captain I," the technician stammered suddenly. "I think I've got it. I'm bypassing the final lock." Drav dared to hope. "Do it now." The technician input the last sequence, fingers flying across the interface. The reactor, a massive cylindrical structure thrumming with blue energy, suddenly emitted a low, ominous hum. The lights in the room flickered, and for a moment it seemed as if they had succeeded. But then the hologram spoke again, this time with a tone of finality. "Your efforts are futile. This ship is more than just metal and circuits. It is a legacy of human defiance. You cannot destroy it." The reactor surged, a pulse of raw energy radiating outward, knocking Drav and the technician off their feet. The drones ceased firing, hovering in place as the entire ship seemed to groan with the strain. The reactor was fighting back. Drav struggled to his feet, his vision swimming from the impact. The technician lay a few feet away, unconscious from the blast. Drav's ears rang, and the ship's systems flickered erratically, as if it were deciding whether to collapse or strike back even harder. "No," Drav muttered, shaking off the dizziness. "No, you can't win." But the hologram persisted, unwavering. This ship was designed for war, and in war there are no second chances. The lights in the room dimmed to near darkness, save for the pulsating glow of the reactor. Drav realized then what was happening. The ship was preparing to go into full lockdown mode, drawing on reserves of power it had conserved for centuries. If he didn't act fast, not only would he die, but the ship would continue to protect itself indefinitely, forever guarding its forgotten place in the void. Desperate, Drav staggered toward the technician, shaking him awake. "Get up! We're not finished yet." The technician groaned, his eyes fluttering open. I thought we had it. We don't. But we're close. We just need to." Drav trailed off, staring at the reactor. An idea wild and dangerous formed in his mind. "We need to overload the core," Drav said, the words feeling like a gamble. If we can force it into meltdown, we can destroy the ship entirely. The technician stared at him, wide-eyed. You want to destroy the entire ship? Do you have a better idea? Drav snapped. It's either that or we die, and this ship keeps hunting us forever. If we go down, we take it with us. The technician hesitated for a moment, then nodded grimly. All right, I'll do it. They scrambled back to the control terminal, inputting a new sequence of commands. The ship's AI, sensing the change in its systems, reacted immediately. The drones, previously inactive, began to advance again, their weapons humming with renewed energy. Drav fired at them, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. The ship wasn't going to let them destroy it without a fight. Almost there. The technician muttered, his hands shaking as he input the final command. Just a little more. The reactor's hum grew louder, the blue glow intensifying. Warning lights flashed across the control room, and the temperature began to rise as the core pushed past its limits. You're going to want to get behind something, the technician shouted. Drav didn't need to be told twice. He ducked behind the nearest bulkhead just as the reactor began to overload. The room shook violently, and the hologram of the Earth Federation officer flickered, its image distorting. You will not escape, the hologram intoned, its voice cracking with static. Drav braced himself as the reactor finally gave way, releasing a deafening explosion of energy that ripped through the room. The force of the blast sent Drav flying, slamming him against the bulkhead. His vision blurred, and for a moment everything went silent. Back on the Crimson Talon, Zevrak watched as the shields around the Orion fluctuated, then collapsed entirely. His sensors detected a massive energy surge from within the derelict ship, followed by a catastrophic explosion that consumed the entire vessel. The Orion, once a relic of humanity's past, was now nothing more than debris scattered across the void. Captain, his science officer said, stunned. The ship, it's gone. Zevrak stared at the view screen, his mind struggling to process what had happened. The derelict, which should have been an easy salvage mission, had turned into a nightmare. And now his best soldiers, including Drav, were dead, sacrificed to destroy an ancient enemy that had refused to die. Return to base, Zevrak ordered, his voice cold. We'll report this anomaly. As the Crimson Talon turned away from the debris field, Zevrak couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them from the darkness. The Veltrax had underestimated humanity once again, and this time it had cost them dearly.